Just weeks ago, South Asia stood on the edge of nuclear catastrophe. India had just launched its biggest ever conventional assault inside Pakistani territory in decades. Pakistan hit back swiftly and hard, surprising even its own citizens with the precision and speed of its response. The world watched in horror as two nuclear armed neighbors seemed ready to go all the way. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi doubled down on what many now call his doctrine of deterrence, insisting that India will no longer be blackmailed by Pakistan's nuclear threat. Pakistan maintains that its nuclear assets act as the most important tool of deterrence, preventing its bellicose and belligerent and pugnacious neighbor from attacking it. Meanwhile, Pakistani politicians like the ruling PMLN's Hanif Abbasi, who in April and the very recently the opposition party's PTI's Omar Ayub have publicly floated the idea of a nuclear response if India dares attack again. So here we are, two nations with nuclear weapons, two populations drenched in nationalism, and two governments convinced that the other will blink first. But what if no one blinks? What if both are driving straight into each other, like in that game of chicken, and neither swerves? Hello and welcome to New Wave Global. You're watching Unraveled with Marvi Sirmed, and tonight on Unraveled we ask, are Pakistan and India playing a game too dangerous for either side to win? And what happens when leaders start believing their own propaganda? That's where our guest tonight comes in. Dr. Aqdas Afzal, economist and columnist, recently wrote a compelling piece in Arab News, challenging the very assumptions behind this dangerous standoff. He says, it's time to throw away the outdated rule book of rational actors and look deeper into how flawed mental models, national myths, and misjudgments shape decision making in South Asia. Welcome, Dr. Afzal, to Unraveled.
Thank you very much, Marvi. It's a pleasure to be here. Look forward to our conversation tonight.
Absolutely. Your article was actually very interesting. And as soon as I read it, I contacted you. Let's have a discussion on this. This seems to be a very good application of some of the international relations concepts to a very real situation that we passed through and very recently. So, would you describe the Pakistan-India standoff as a version of the game of chicken for our viewers who might not be familiar? Can you please explain this analogy in simple terms
Sure.
and why does this matter now?
Sure, I will do my best. Well, first of all, let me just say that the recent standoff, the flare up in South Asia, was very concerning, both as a Pakistani and as a citizen of the world, because I don't think any sane person would like to see the doomsday scenario. And this is a very real issue in South Asia because nowhere else in the world you have two contiguous nuclear powers, going at each other. So I think in that sense, I was very concerned,
Hmm.
and I think this idea, the question that you put to me, that whether I would describe the situation between India and Pakistan as a game of chicken, I'm not so sure about if that's the case. But let me just first say that all the theories and policies and the academia, when they look at how two nations go at each other, especially when it comes to nuclear brinksmanship, they often look at it through the lens of what is called game theory. And within game theory, you have these different games, so to speak, these two by two matrices. I mean, some of them are prisoner's dilemma, game of chicken happens to be one of them, so on and so forth. And the game of chicken, especially, is one such heuristic, one such situation in which policymakers are instructed or shown how to go about dealing with the adversary should they find themselves in a situation
Hmm.
where they're not so sure as to what the real intentions of their enemy are.
Hmm.
And so, when I wrote my piece, I was taken back quite a number of years when I used to be, so I'm a very interesting type of economist. My earlier training was done in both political science and economics. And my first master's was actually in political science before I switched to economics. So I was taken back many years when one of my professors at a leading US graduate school was explaining the idea of the game of chicken to us in a lecture.
Hmm.
And I was taken aback because one of the defining assumptions within the game of chicken. So, for your audience who may not know what the game of chicken is all about, within the game, there is the situation that there are two drivers who are heading straight towards each other at
Hmm.
full speed.
Hmm.
And the idea is that both of them are rational, neither of them wants to die. So a time will come that one of them will swerve to avoid the oncoming driver. And whoever so swerves first is considered to be chickening out or the loser. Now, this is exactly how the game of chicken is constructed, that you have two nuclear armed adversaries going at each other, and one of them is by all accounts giving the signal that they are interested or they are determined to use, the nuclear option, so to speak. So whoever, and both of them are considered rational. So whoever, what's the word? Um, I shouldn't say surrenders, but whoever de-escalates first is considered to chicken out or be the loser. So
Hmm.
this is what the game of chicken is all about. This is a heuristic that is used to teach policymakers how to deal with such a situation. The game of chicken was developed by Thomas Schelling, who later earned the Nobel Prize in economics in the year 2005. And he developed this in 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 the time of peak Cold War, and his idea at the Rand Corporation, and his ideas were then subsequently put into practice, especially during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That which was a famous nuclear standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union, in which the Soviet Union was then seen to, quote unquote, chicken out. So my problem, and the reason why I wrote my piece, and sorry for the long-winded explanation, but the reason why I wrote my piece was that one of the defining assumptions within the game of chicken is that both actors, both drivers, both agents, both nations are rational, quote unquote. And this idea of rationality, I'd just like to explain that we often talk about people being rational without putting much thought into what rationality actually means. So, I mean, in plain speak, rationality basically means that you are driven by reason. You are a reasonable, you use reason to reach your conclusions. You look at evidence before jumping to conclusions. You are consistent, and finally, that you have certain objectives in mind, that your actions driving are driven by certain goals.
Yeah.
In a sense, rationality or being rational is the exact opposite of being emotional. So, in a sense, rationality is considered a very important virtue. But the problem is, I mean, I don't know if you want to, interject here and ask me a following question, but, so this was one of
My
the
next
reasons why I
question, you
wrote my
already
piece.
answered my next question. That was my next question, but go on.
So I'll just say that, the problem with rationality or this assumption of rationality is that there is a lot of evidence now. There is a lot of evidence to suggest, and this is again coming from the work of Herbert Simon, who came up
Hmm.
with the idea of bounded rationality, who I believe, if I'm not mistaken,
Hmm.
also won a Nobel Prize. I'm going to have to check. My knowledge of Nobel laureates is not what it used to be. But the idea of bounded rationality is that sometimes or oftentimes people construct certain mental models of how reality operates. And
Hmm.
within those models, they are perfectly rational. But the problem is that if their mental model is compromised or does
Hmm.
not represent reality, and the person is still perfectly rational, we are heading for doomsday scenario. So In the case of the game of chicken, if one of the drivers believes, their mental model tells them that their car can jump over other cars, they are going to, head towards the other driver at full speed. And if
Mm.
that mental model is not what reality is, then we are looking at a very sort of a harrowing outcome of the situation. So my issue is with this assumption of reality. Sorry, with this assumption of rationality that's just not borne out by evidence, especially as it was shown to us by the work of Herbert Simon. And then in your subsequent question, there are many other problems with using the game of chicken as a uh, policy tool by any of the players, especially in a nuclear conflict
Yeah. And you
in
see,
South Asia.
absolutely. Pakistan's response, in, after India's attack was unexpectedly strong and swift. But India now says it will respond to any future attack, regardless of nuclear threats. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi's exact words probably were that India will call Pakistan's nuclear bluff. Do you think do you think India is calling it, it's a so India is seeing what Pakistan sees as deterrence, India sees as bluff or tool for blackmailing. And
Mhm.
in that situation, where do we, I mean, no one seems to be ready to blink. If we
Right.
are again on the brink and no one blinks, how the world is going to, what to do about it?
That is a very, very interesting question, Mavi, because I was going to get into that in a little bit. But before I try to answer your question, I would just like to remind you and the audience there's one interview that I saw of the Indian, uh, I think the rank is Chief of Defense Staff, General Chauhan, and in
Mm,
which he was saying that, I mean, he seemed to come across as a very articulate gentleman, and he seemed to be making the claim that both sides operated in certain rationality. Both sides were rational. There was rationality on both sides, and this is exactly what I am referring to. That in situations like these, there is this assumption of rationality, both on your own part, because if even if your mental model is flawed, you will think that you are rational, and on part of your adversary. And you are thinking, you're assuming that your adversary is also rational. And the problem, again, as I explained, is that sometimes people have flawed mental models. I mean, their assessment of reality is not reality itself, and they can be rational within the bounds of that mental model, and it's a very dangerous situation. So, coming back to the question that you posed, look, Thomas Schelling, somebody who developed this idea, this game of chicken or strategic interaction to a very advanced level, somebody who's associated with bringing game theory into nuclear brinksmanship, into understanding nuclear brinksmanship, used to have a very interesting theory, and it was called madman theory. So let me explain what the madman theory is and how it applies to the context of nuclear South Asia.
mhm,
So Schelling says that when you are engaged in some kind of a nuclear brinksmanship with your adversary, it serves to appear completely irrational or like a mad person, so that whatever you are trying to signal is taken as a credible commitment by your adversary. So, if either of the two nations, signal that they are going to use the ultimate weapon against the adversary, and if that threat, if that signaling is taken as credible,
mm,
then this could, and again, let me remind you that Schelling is actually saying that there is a lot of benefit in appearing to be a mad person, madman theory, that you basically pretend that you are willing to use the option which is the ultimate option. So there is a certain premium attached to appearing irrational. But the
mm,
problem with that situation is, okay, let's look at the situation when one of the adversaries, I don't want to name other country, but if one of the countries, one of the states
mm,
appears irrational or as a madman to
Hmm.
their enemy. In the first situation, the enemy or the adversary is going
Hmm.
to take that threat as credible. That, okay, this person is not pretending, they're actually going to do something crazy. In
Hmm.
that case, that adversary might be pushed to use their own ultimate weapon against country number one. And
Hmm.
in the second situation, if the adversary knows exactly that you are pretending, that you are never going to use the ultimate weapon against them, then they are going to become extremely bold. And then they are going to cross all the red lines that are actually going to encourage country number one to move towards the ultimate option. So, this idea of rationality, using the game of chicken to understand nuclear brinksmanship in two contiguous countries of the world is extremely dangerous. So, the whole motivation of writing that column was that we need to move beyond these so called models from game theory towards something that is a school within international relations, the school of constructivism, not just realism,
Yeah, we'll come to
Straussian.
that. Yeah,
Okay,
I have reserved my questions on that for you.
sure.
But first, so the madman theory. I think both India and Pakistan are trying to appear crazy madmen. Um, from Pakistani side, as I already mentioned, and this is not the first time. Hanif Abbasi, Umar Ayub so many others have been saying before. Khaja Asif once said that we haven't kept these nukes for museums. We are going to use them when the time comes. So Pakistan has been doing it for a long time, but now we see this from India as well. But here I will bring Clausewitz. Many thinkers, intellectuals, leaders in Pakistan, in both Pakistan and India, they often cite Clausewitz that the best way to preserve peace is to prepare for war. Something to this effect, which is
Hmm.
attributed to Clausewitz. So, in their view, showing strength and actually acquiring strength, even making threats, is necessary to deter the other side. Exactly what you were, trying to articulate using madman theory. But does this logic really hold in a region where both sides are armed with nukes and where misjudgments can spiral very quickly? And when both the sides are acting as madmen, and I'm not sure they are acting, I'm afraid they actually are. What?
I certainly hope that they are pretending, for the sake
Yeah.
of 1.5 billion people of this region.
Yeah. But
So, well, I mean, like I said, I mean, I'm pretty sure that Clausewitz is somebody who is cited within the Straussian or the realist school, in which you don't really want to understand
mm,
reality as it exists in a very complex society. So you're constantly looking, you're black boxing international relations. You're only looking at the level of the structures at the international state system. You're constantly arguing about one player versus another player, one
mm,
state versus another state. Fact of the matter is that reality exists at multiple levels. There are
mm,
structures and then there are agents at the bottom. Real human beings who attach meanings, who talk to each other, who understand, who, are able to go beyond their differences. So I think this idea of using realism or the realist school of international relations, Straussian ideas,
mm,
Clausewitz ideas, I think they are terribly reductive. I think they don't really understand reality the way it actually operates or the way it actually is. And so, at the sake of sounding repetitious, I'll just say that reality exists at multiple levels. There are structures and then there are agents. And and so just to talk about states at the level of structures, this higher level, misses this important reality that there are human beings who can talk to each other, who have attached certain meanings to these weapons, And there was a time that these two countries, or intellectuals in these two countries, or people in these two countries, could actually talk to each other. And there was this time a few years ago when things were looking up. And I certainly hope that we would reach a point in history where we too could travel freely and people from other countries could come. But as you have seen, that the situation has regressed to a point where things have now become very, very concerning.
Yeah, but see, now we come to your point, the crucial point that you make in your article. So madman theory is dangerous. Game theory doesn't help us anymore. So what does? What framework should leaders and analysts use to, uh, use instead to avoid war? And what is the most appropriate model you would suggest?
Well, first of all, I would like to take issue with this idea of rationality. So we've already talked about that this assumption of rationality is not really borne out from evidence. There is a lot of work to show that human beings aren't really perfectly rational. They are boundedly rational at best. So they can be rational within the bounds of their own mental model. So that's a very very dangerous idea to take and run with. So now that leaves us that this assumption of rationality is not borne out. So how can we use game theory? We cannot. So this is where I would like to suggest that we move beyond looking at relationships or relations within South Asia, or for that matter, for the rest of the world, from a Straussian or a realist framework to a constructivist framework, something that is associated with the work of Alex Wendt, his famous work, The Social Theory of International Relations, 1997, if I'm not mistaken, in
Hmm.
which he builds on, and many social scientists would find this very interesting, that he actually builds on frameworks that he came across in critical realism, Bhaskar's work. And he used that work to develop this multi-tier theory of international relations, in which you have the states talking to each other, but then you also have agents, human beings who are not perfectly rational, who are not only talking to the upper levels, but also have the ability to talk to each other, to assign meanings, to reinterpret what's going on and move beyond history towards a situation in which peace can become sustainable. So I would just say that instead of talking about things like that offense is the best defense or quoting Clausewitz, I think that this is not only is it reductive, I think it doesn't do justice to human intellect and how human beings have been able to move beyond their historic differences and find sustainable peace with not only with other nations but with other communities, and there are a lot of examples of that.
But how do we, when you apply constructivism to, for example, the situation between Pakistan and India, how does it translate into, what happens then? How would you
So I
translate
would
to the reality?
I think I'm taken back again many years when I remember there was a peace initiative between India and Pakistan. The Indian cricket team was in Pakistan, and there was a lot of good feelings, positive feelings on both sides, and there was a campaign on media, and then people were talking to each other. Track two was happening, track three was happening. Intellectuals were coming over. People were going from Pakistan to India. People were talking to each other. I'm sure you have come across many people from India. You can count many friends among people from India. The same is true for me. I mean, over the period of years, some of my very good friends have come from India. So I think this is probably the first step. I think and the first step is that the solution to our issues in this, so by no means am I saying that there are no real issues in South Asia. So
Mm.
let's put that to the side for 1 second. So what I'm saying is that all solutions to our problems, I think, must be found through talking to each other as human beings. And I think human beings have that ability. We have shown a lot of promise in the past. And I think because a huge section of South Asia people speak Urdu slash Hindi, I think the chances of finding solutions, permanent solutions, sustainable solutions, I think the probability is very high. But we have to start talking to each other.
Unfortunately, I mean, you were saying, and I was just, a train of thoughts was going through my mind. I have been, involved in this track two and track three initiatives for past 30 years.
Mm.
I haven't seen the level of intolerance, the level of hatred against each other that I'm seeing now, more in Indians for Pakistanis than in Pakistanis for Indians. It's
I think
much
that's absolutely right.
far more in Indians. So the constituency of peace that I call the people you are talking about who could talk to each other. Uh, Many of my friends, very dear friends in Indian media, have recently completely, unfollowed me, uh, stopped talking to me just because we are from two nations who are, fighting with each other. This kind of belligerence I haven't seen in last 30 years. This is absolutely unimaginable. So in this situation where even the civil societies, even the
Mm.
people among which we are advocating the contact, they are hating on each other. Most
Mhm.
of the journalists, most of the civil society is hating on each other, full of poison against each other. How, what is the chances of constructivism working here?
Well, to be honest, I think they're very slim at the moment. But I think you would appreciate the fact that these changes that have taken place, the way we perceive each other. I think a lot has been going on in India, especially with the rise of Hindutva uh, politics in India. And many people have written about this, how a certain narrative is changed into a discourse and how that is used to win votes in different electoral constituencies. So I think right now we are definitely facing a very challenging situation. But this is something that I have also been thinking about, and you obviously know that within Pakistan there are certain corridors of power that exercise real power. So this is again something that I have been thinking about, that if there is going to be a sustainable peace between Pakistan and India, it must be people who have power in Pakistan right now talking to um, Hindutva politicians. Because if you have people at the center talking to each other, the fringe or the extreme fringe is not going to accept it. And this is something that we have seen over and over and over again when people who don't really exercise real power within a system try to talk peace with the other side, it just frizzles out. So, where some people see a crisis, where some people see challenges, I also see an opportunity, if you see what I'm trying to say.
I would like to see it that way, and that's a brilliant way of ending this episode. There is there's always a silver lining. There's always a sliver of hope, and thank you very much for showing us that. And we really hope that our viewers, if some people from Indian media, some of my Indian friends are watching this, they think about it because that's not the way we want to raise our kids. Uh, we often assume that people in charge are playing 3D chess, rational, strategic, and always calculating. But what if they're just playing chicken? And what if they actually think they will survive the crash? Dr. Aqdas Afzal reminds us that rationality is not a given. And in South Asia, it's often overruled by ideology, history, ego. If May 2025 showed us anything, It's that nuclear war isn't unthinkable anymore. It's dangerously plausible. This isn't about who is tougher. It's about who is willing to live. And until we change the way we think about deterrence, about war, about nationalism, about each other, as Afzal was saying, we may be running out of time. It's high time that we think about that. Thank you very much, Dr. Afzal. You have
You're
been
very
with
welcome. It was a pleasure talking to you.
absolutely, and we hope that you'll come back to Unraveled. So thank you, viewers. I'm Marvi Sirmed signing off. Thank you for watching.